Loneliness in the Mirrors. Chapter 1. Behind the Mirrors. Mr. Livingston opened the doors of his small, cozy barbershop every morning. Inside, everything was meticulously in its place. Chairs lined up neatly along the mirrors, tools carefully arranged on the counter, and the scent of shaving oils and lotions filled the air. This place had become his home, a refuge from the world that seemed distant and foreign outside the shop's walls. Each new day passed much like the previous one, without surprises, but with an underlying sense of melancholy. Livingston appeared content with his work, yet something in his eyes spoke of a deep, carefully hidden emptiness. His clients came and went, each bringing their own stories. Some shared joys, others sorrows, and some simply enjoyed the silence that reigned in the shop, where the only sounds were the snip of scissors and the soft hum of a radio. Livingston was a listener. He always knew when to insert a word, when to support the conversation, or when to just nod in understanding. But he rarely opened up himself, preferring to keep his thoughts private. Every day he hid behind the mirrors, creating an illusion of serenity. But inside, storms raged that no one could see. One of his regular clients was Sam, a young man who worked part-time at the shop. Sam was the complete opposite of Livingston. He was cheerful, outgoing, and always ready with a joke. Yet despite this, he sensed that there was more to Livingston than just professionalism. "Have you ever thought about leaving this place?" Sam asked one evening, sitting down next to Livingston after the shop had closed. Livingston looked up from cleaning his tools and met Sam's gaze. There was a weariness in his eyes. "Why would I?" he asked. "This place is my life. It's all I have." Sam pondered this, realizing that the conversation had not gone as he had hoped. He knew that Livingston was more complex than he appeared, and that there was something deeper behind his words. But he decided not to press further. When Sam left, Livingston was alone again in the silence. He stood in front of a mirror, studying his reflection. Over the years, lines had formed on his face. His eyes had lost some of their brightness, but something in his face remained unchanged. The mirrors were his only listeners, and he often thought they knew him better than anyone else. Gazing into his own reflection, he understood that he was hiding the truth from himself. The mirrors held his secrets, secrets that could once have destroyed his life if anyone else found out. Chapter 2. Emma and her questions. Emma always came to the barbershop at the same time, midday, when the clientele was sparse and the atmosphere in the shop was calm. Her visits became more frequent, and each time she tried to engage Livingston in conversations that went beyond the usual small talk about haircuts or the weather. "It's so cozy here," she remarked one day, settling into the chair. "But it seems a bit too quiet sometimes, don't you think?" Livingston, as usual, gave a brief smile and continued his work. "Sometimes silence is better than noise," he replied without looking at her. But Emma was persistent. Her interest in Livingston grew with each visit. She noticed the shadow of sadness in his eyes, hidden behind his professional politeness. Her questions became more personal. "Have you ever thought about taking a vacation?" she asked one day as he cut her hair. Vacation? Livingston was momentarily taken aback by the question. "No, I prefer to work." "Everyone needs a break, even you, Mr. Livingston," she responded gently. Livingston fell silent, focusing on his work, but his thoughts were elsewhere. He began to realize that Emma was penetrating deeper into his world than any other client had. This troubled him, but also brought a strange sense of comfort, as if someone had finally noticed what was going on inside him. Emma became a bridge between his inner world and the outside. She was trying to understand what lay behind his impassive facade, and this evoked mixed feelings in Livingston. He feared that someone might uncover the truth, yet at the same time, he felt that his loneliness was no longer as overwhelming. Chapter 3. Reflections of the Past. The day came that Livingston would never forget. Ever since he opened his barbershop, his life had followed a certain routine, and he never expected that the past would come back to haunt him. But on that day when the doorbell chimed, Livingston felt his heart stop. Jonathan entered the shop. This man was tied to the most terrifying memory that Livingston had tried so hard to forget. Jonathan seemed like a ghost from the past who had suddenly come to life. returning to shatter the world Livingston had so carefully built. "It's been a long time, Livingston," Jonathan said with a certain challenge in his voice. Livingston didn't reply, just stared at him, trying to collect his thoughts. All he wanted was to forget what had happened so many years ago. But Jonathan was here, and he wasn't going to leave. Emma, who happened to be in the shop at that moment, sensed that something was wrong. She saw the change in Livingston's face, the disappearance of his usual calm demeanor. She understood that this man had brought something that could destroy Livingston's peace. Jonathan sat down in the chair and looked in the mirror. "How many years has it been, Livingston? 10? 15? You still avoid talking about the past?" These words struck Livingston like lightning. He could no longer hide. Everything he had tried so hard to bury began to surface. The memories he had tried to forget overwhelmed him like a storm. Emma, realizing that something important was happening, stayed in the shop. She watched as Livingston struggled with his emotions, but did not intervene. She felt that the moment of truth had come. Chapter 4: The Shattered Mirror. The past that Livingston had tried to forget was linked to a tragic event that had occurred many years ago. Young and full of ambition, he and Jonathan had opened a barbershop in another city. Everything was going well until one day disaster struck. A fire destroyed their shop, and with it, their dreams and ambitions. A person died in that fire, and for many years Livingston lived with a sense of guilt that tormented his soul. Jonathan, returning to the city, not only brought back memories, he accused Livingston of being responsible for what had happened. However, this time Livingston was not ready to simply accept these accusations. Over the years since that tragic event, he had carefully analyzed the details, gathered information, and finally collected enough evidence to uncover the truth. When Jonathan entered the shop, his voice was full of bitterness and anger. "You destroyed our lives, Livingston," he blurted out as soon as he crossed the threshold. "You should have confessed back then, but you hid behind your scissors and mirrors." Livingston looked at him calmly, seeing before him a man he had once considered a friend, now seeing in him an accuser blinded by his own pain. "Jonathan," he began, trying to keep his voice steady, "I wasn't responsible for what happened." Jonathan sneered. "Tell that to the people who died in that fire. Do you think you can turn back time?" "No," Livingston replied, "but I can bring back the truth." These words caught Jonathan off guard. Livingston opened a drawer and pulled out a folder of documents. "I spent many years studying what happened. At the time, I was broken and couldn't defend myself. But now I have all the evidence I need to prove that I wasn't at fault." Jonathan stepped forward to grab the documents, but Livingston held his hand back. "The fire was caused by an electrical short," Livingston continued. "The wiring in the wall was damaged during the renovations you, Jonathan, arranged. I found the contractor who confirmed it. He was ready to testify, but you disappeared, leaving me alone with this burden." Jonathan paled, his confidence wavering. "That's not true. You're just trying to shift the blame." "No, Jonathan," Livingston said sadly. "I blame myself for a long time, but now I know it wasn't my fault. The blame lies with the negligence of the builders you hired, and I can prove it." Jonathan slowly sat down in the chair, overwhelmed by shock. He had no further arguments. Livingston waited a moment, then continued. "I was willing to accept the guilt you placed on me because I didn't know the whole truth. But now I do, and I want you to accept it too." Jonathan was silent, processing what he had heard. Then, raising his head, he spoke. I didn't know. I was sure it was you, that we were to blame. I lost everything back then, just like you did. But I couldn't accept it. I needed someone to blame." Livingston realized that Jonathan was no longer the enemy he had imagined. They were both victims of that tragedy, and both needed to find a way to move on. Emma, who had witnessed the entire conversation, quietly approached Livingston and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Now you're free," she said softly. Livingston felt the weight that had burdened his heart for so many years finally begin to lift. He was no longer a prisoner of his fears and guilt. He had found the truth, and with it, his freedom. Jonathan, realizing that his accusations were false, apologized to Livingston. They both understood that only through the truth could they find peace in their souls. Chapter 5. Light at the End of the Path. Several months passed after Jonathan left the town. Livingston's barbershop was filled with life once again. But this was a different kind of life. Livingston no longer hid behind the mirrors but lived fully, enjoying each day. Emma remained by his side, and their relationship grew deeper than just client and barber. Livingston finally opened his heart and allowed himself to be happy. He had learned to accept his past for what it was, and he no longer feared his memories. The loneliness that had been his constant companion for so long was replaced by a new life, full of light and hope. The end. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to our channel and don't forget to hit the like button. Thank you for your attention.